On this Sunday night, the wounds of war. Panic and devastation as Israel expands its assault in southern Gaza. The children who cannot escape the bloodshed and the civilians who say there's nowhere to run. How the climate crisis is fueling a health crisis.
We see more heart attacks, more strokes during those periods of high pollution.
Canadian doctors sound the alarm about climate-induced sickness at COP28.
I'm just curious if you would be willing to answer in English.
Point of order, Madam Chair. It's just unacceptable.
A burning question and the political firestorm over bilingualism. Friends forever.
Thought of him going, even though he's just a puppy right now, breaks my heart.
A new drug that could help large dogs live longer.
Global National with Farah Nasser. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the carnage in southern Gaza and the chaos inside hospitals struggling to cope. As Israel intensifies its assault further south, doctors and medical staff are at a breaking point. After 8 weeks of bloodshed and a brief 7-day pause, they're exhausted. A warning, the video here is disturbing. Hospital corridors full of children covered in blood, shaken and scarred by the nightmare they are living. Israel has ordered people to leave certain parts of Gaza for their own safety after expanding its offensive in the south, targeting areas around Khan Yunis, where it believes many Hamas leaders are hiding. But the southern Gaza Strip is also where civilians have sought shelter in the last month, and many say there is nowhere left to go that is safe. Redmond Shannon has our top story tonight, and a warning, some of the images are disturbing.
UNICEF calls this a war on children. In Jabalia camp near Gaza City, more kids are confronted with grief and pain. My father and brother have been killed, says this boy. Israel says it has now launched 10,000 airstrikes on Gaza since the Hamas attacks of October 7th. The focus of those is moving south. The head of Israel's defense forces says the operation in the south will match the north. A spokesperson later confirming troops are now on the ground in the south. It's an area previously supposed to be the safer half of Gaza. This weekend, Khan Yunis in the south experienced what may have been its heaviest bombing of the war so far. Its hospitals under more strain than ever. Israel is now publishing maps to instruct people where to go to stay safe. This man says he and his family are fleeing for the 5th time in 2 months, insisting there is nowhere safe left. The recent week-long pause in fighting already a distant memory.
They need to go back to that pause, humanitarian pause, ceasefire, call it as you want, so that the whole more positive processes can start again, including putting aid into Gaza to help people that are at risk of their lives.
Despite growing, if measured, U.S. pressure to protect civilians in Gaza, Israel says it won't finish until it believes it has eliminated Hamas. Part of that mission includes destroying the tunnel network Israel claims is used by Hamas to coordinate its operations. Israel says it has destroyed 500 of the 800 tunnel shafts it has found. There is grief and fear in Israel too, even if in much smaller numbers. Soldier Ashalwu Sama laid to rest on Sunday, and a synagogue in southern Israel damaged by a rocket attack. Some hopeful news, though, for people in Gaza with links to Canada. 165 citizens, permanent residents and their families are on a new list of those authorised to leave Gaza for Egypt. Eric?
Redmond Shannon tonight. Thank you. As Israel turns the focus of its military operation from northern Gaza to the south, the UN says the number of internally displaced Palestinians has risen to 1.8 million, close to 80% of the population. In other words, about 4 out of 5 people in Gaza have been forced from their homes. Many are living in tents, makeshift shelters, or sleeping on the streets, having moved to southern Gaza to escape Israel's initial bombing campaign in the north. American officials are investigating reports of attacks on a U.S. warship and commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The Pentagon says it does not believe the American warship was intentionally targeted. Yemen's Houthi rebels claimed responsibility for the attack in a televised statement, saying the group carried out a targeting operation against 2 Israeli ships. Israel's military says those ships have no connection to the State of Israel. In Paris, a tourist was killed near the Eiffel Tower Saturday night in what France's president is calling a terrorist attack. Police say a 26-year-old French national targeted a German couple with a knife, fatally injuring a 23-year-old man. Later, 2 others were attacked with a hammer. A suspect was then tasered by police and arrested. France's interior minister says the alleged attacker told police he was upset over the crisis in Gaza. He previously served 4 years in prison for planning violence. He's also on a security watch list and was undergoing psychiatric treatment. A warning, some of the images in this next story are graphic. 4 people are dead in the southern Philippines after a bomb attack at a university. The blast happened during a Catholic mass in a gymnasium. 50 others were also wounded. Islamic State militants claimed responsibility for the attack, which the Philippine president says was perpetrated by foreign terrorists. The attack happened in Marawi, the largest Muslim city in the predominantly Catholic country. Military officials say it could be retaliation following clashes with militants in the surrounding region. At the COP28 climate summit in Dubai, there's renewed urgency for the world to tackle climate change and cut greenhouse gas emissions. Yet the president and host of this year's summit is being criticized for new comments, saying there is, quote, no science behind the need to phase out fossil fuels. The latest controversy comes as COP28 is making health the focus of the summit for the very first time. Abigail Bimman reports.
The head of COP28 under fire again.
There is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5.
Reported by The Guardian and Center for Climate Reporting, Sultan Al-Jaber made the comments in an online event ahead of the summit. He also suggested there can't be a phase out of fossil fuels alongside sustainable development, quote, unless you want to take the world back into caves. Many have already called his position as head of the United Arab Emirates state oil company a conflict of interest.
Abusing the public's trust by naming the CEO of one of the largest and least responsible oil companies in the world as head of the COP.
This actually sounds very close to climate denial language.
Former Environment Minister Catherine McKenna says she wants to see action at the summit, including a long-awaited oil and gas emissions cap from Canada.
And when you hear the stories for small island states that will literally be underwater if we exceed 1.5 degrees, it is really galling when you hear the head of the COP to say that we can't phase out fossil fuels.
See if I can extract some of these fossil fuels.
Also looking for a fossil fuel phase-out commitment, doctors, including Canadians, taking part in the first ever health-focused day at COP.
We see more heart attacks, more strokes during those periods of high pollution events, like a wildfire smoke day.
Calgary ER Dr. Joe Vipon says Canadians feel the effects of climate change through everything from fires to high temperatures to Lyme disease. Globally, the World Health Organization says heat-related deaths for people over 65 climbed by 75% in 2 decades.
To protect health from the impacts of climate change, we must recognize the linkages between health and the environment and articulate these impacts across all sectors of our society.
Canada signed on to the first ever climate and health declaration at COP. Also Sunday, a $5 million contribution from Canada to help the poorest countries become climate resilient. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Quebec entrepreneur Daniel Langlois and his wife Dominique Marchand have reportedly been found dead on the Caribbean island of Dominica. Langlois is known for founding Softimage, a digital effects company used in several blockbuster movies. According to local news reports, their bodies were found in a charred vehicle on Friday. Langlois and Marchand owned a luxury resort on the island. Global Affairs Canada says it's aware of the deaths of 2 Canadians in Dominica, but would not confirm their identities. There's more political fallout tonight over the use of bilingualism in this country after a Conservative MP asked the Heritage Minister to reply to a question last week in English. That moment has incited plenty of reaction, especially in Quebec, a province where the Conservatives are trying to make inroads while the Premier is trying to protect the French language. Tim Sargent reports.
I'm just curious if you would be willing to answer in English.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
That one question created an immediate political firestorm of reaction.
The fact that the Conservative Party is demanding that a member only use one language, to me, is just unacceptable.
Conservative MP Raquel Thomas asking Heritage Minister Pascal Saint-Onge, whose mother tongue is French, to answer a question in English during a committee hearing.
For the Conservatives to put in question official bilingualism.
The leader of the Bloc Québécois writing on social media that bilingualism in Canada is the francophone who switches to English on demand, adding in quotes, "speak white," a reference to a poem with the same name about the oppression of francophones in Canada. The issue comes at a time when language has once again become a hot political topic in Quebec.
Savez-vous ce qu'on propose?
The Premier is doubling down on protecting and promoting the French language, passing at least one law that strengthens the use of French in the workplace, and trying to fast-track another that some warn could threaten the use of English in the healthcare system.
Well, it's unfortunate.
This advocate for protecting English in Quebec says a language request made at the federal level by an MP for a colleague to answer a question in English has ramifications in Quebec, where the English-speaking population is frequently battling to protect their minority rights.
Certainly, this kind of thing does not help us, and we expect our members of parliament to support our minority language community.
Some analysts say the issue has put the Conservatives in damage control in Quebec.
This complicates the situation for Pierre Poilievre in Quebec.
Political observers say the Conservatives will have to support the use of French in Quebec if they hope to make a big push at the next federal election.
They will have to, emphasize bilingualism and the need to protect French, because if they want to win seats in Quebec, more seats in Quebec, they have to emphasize this.
While language may not be a top priority issue for most Quebecers, it's always a lightning rod, and politicians will likely continue to try and spin this latest language issue for their political gain. Tim Sargent, Global News, Montreal.
Surging rent prices in Nova Scotia. Coming up, how it's fueling more criticism during a worsening housing crisis. Plus, the ongoing search for a missing marsupial in Ontario. Why concerns for this runaway kangaroo are growing. According to Statistics Canada, rent inflation in Nova Scotia is the highest in the country and the highest it's ever been since the agency started tracking that data in 1979. This as Nova Scotia struggles with homelessness. Housing advocates and landlords alike blame the province for failing to act, but as Heidi Petracek explains, they have very different ideas on finding a solution.
When Lisa Hayhurst's holiday decorations come down, her rent will go up.
It's gone up so much each year. Now it's going up to, I think, 5.1%.
In the new year, Nova Scotia's rent cap changes from 2% to 5%, and Hayhurst's budget will tighten.
Once I pay my rent, there's not a lot left over.
Compared to the same time last year, rents in Nova Scotia increased more in October than anywhere else in Canada. The rate of rent inflation hit just over 14%. The next highest, Alberta, at 9.6%, British Columbia and Quebec both at 8.8%.
Even though supply has increased, like in Nova Scotia, we've seen the highest completion rate of rental units, but demand has been stronger.
That's because more people are moving into Halifax, which also means the capital's homeless population has grown.
What I see when people come in is a lot of people who are really scared.
The real culprit, he says, provincial regulations allowing landlords to end a fixed-term lease for one tenant and sign another up for the same unit at a higher rent.
So this totally undermines the bargaining power of tenants and the usefulness of the rent cap.
While landlords say they're squeezed between inflation and the rent cap.
What happens, the rents go up in the newer units because they're subsidizing the rent control units. They have to make the economics work.
With most cases brought in front of the Tenancy Board for non-payment of rent, Russell says what's needed is extra financial help for tenants.
But the province isn't budging. It says its rent cap is only temporary, while also admitting fixed-term leases are being used for, quote, unintended purposes. But it's made no indication it plans to change either one. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Ahead, just how much can the Liberals improve their political fortunes by potentially replacing their leader? In the wake of recent polling that showed 3 out of 4 Canadians want Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to step down, some Liberals are wondering if they might do better in the next election with a new leader. In new polling provided exclusively to Global News, Ipsos examined that proposition, and it looks unlikely that there is a savior on the horizon. Our chief political correspondent, David Akin, reports. David?
It is the Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, whose name is most often mentioned as a possible replacement for Justin Trudeau, and we asked her last week what she thought about that.
We have a great Prime Minister, and my focus is 100% on supporting the Prime Minister.
We also asked Treasury Board President Anita Anand if she wanted to be leader. Should they ever come? What do you think? She didn't think much of the question. But Ipsos asked Canadians how much more likely they might be to vote Liberal with a new leader. Just 25% said more likely with Freeland in charge, 21% with Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly, 18% with former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, 17% with Anand, and 16% with Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne at the helm. But none of those potential leaders would bring in enough voters to the Liberals to eliminate the huge lead the Conservatives had.
There's nothing there. There's no silver lining that anybody can really grab on that suggests that there's any pathway through to improving these situations.
That's not to say the Liberals aren't trying to improve the numbers. One of the Liberal Party's campaign co-chairs says one way the party will do that is by focusing a little less on Trudeau and highlight others to sell the Liberal brand.
I think we have a great team now, too, and people can see that. I think Canadians will see other players on this team.
In any event, Trudeau himself is telling anyone who asks that he is spoiling for a showdown with Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre. And Trudeau is confident of a 4th consecutive victory, and that is something only John A. Macdonald and Wilfrid Laurier have ever done. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
What would you do for more time with your furry friend? The drug that could add a year to your dog's life, coming up on Global National.
Miles Goodwin, the longtime lead singer of Canadian band April Wine, has died at the age of 75. Goodwin lived in the Halifax area and fronted the band for more than 50 years. Famous for hits like You Could Have Been a Lady and Rollin', the band was inducted into Canada's Walk of Fame earlier this year. In Ontario, it's day 4 of the search for a runaway kangaroo that escaped while a delivery driver was transporting 2 kangaroos to Quebec. They stopped at the Oshawa Zoo to let them stretch their legs, say police, but one of them jumped over the handlers' heads. Dozens of people have since spotted the fugitive marsupial, but she remains on the loose. And there is growing concern as the weather gets colder. Searchers believe the kangaroo is tired and afraid and may be sheltering out of sight to try to keep warm. If spotted, the message is to call animal control officers and do not approach the kangaroo. Advice you don't hear very often in this country. It's said to be the sad part of pet ownership. No matter how long they live, it always feels like you're forced to say goodbye far too soon. Researchers have been looking for ways to extend the lifespan of pets, and as Heather Yorks-West explains, they appear to be on the verge of a breakthrough.
He's only 9 months old, but Wiley's family knows any time spent with this good boy will be precious. Dog years are few.
The thought of him going, even though he's just a puppy right now, breaks my heart.
For large breed dogs where lifespans can be as short as 5 to 8 years, the heartbreak comes quick. But what if that could change?
We're working on extending the healthy lifespan of large and giant breed dogs. So think
Great Danes, Bernese Mountain Dogs, even I have a sleeping Rottie across from me.
This week, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration found that the drug developed by Loyal, a biotech company based in California, had a reasonable expectation of effectiveness. A major hurdle cleared as the company works to bring the first ever longevity drug for dogs to market.
What the drug does is tampers down the signaling of this growth hormone IGF-1. It slows that rate of aging to levels that are already healthily seen in smaller dogs, to hopefully give them more healthy years.
But the development raises ethical questions too. Just because you could prolong your dog's life, does that mean you should?
When I first read the news, I found it absolutely fascinating. But then all of a sudden I had a flurry of questions and concerns. Bodie, Rocket, Wolfie, go man, go!
Dog trainer and behaviorist Brad Pattison says he worries about the quality of life dogs would experience in those last prolonged years, where large breeds are more likely to experience hip dysplasia or arthritis pain.
I think it's a great milestone for longevity companies in general.
Because Loyal is not the only biotech company pursuing longevity therapies. Work is underway for human treatments too, and the science is close.
Within 10 to 15 years, we might see some combinatorial therapies that can target multiple organs and maybe provide some degree of systemic rejuvenation or systemic delaying of aging.
The promise of longer lives for both people and their four-legged friends could be realized soon. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
More ethical questions about our pets. And that's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Eric Sorensen. Tonight's Your Canada is the British Columbia Legislature in Victoria. We love seeing Your Canada. Please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Jeff Semple will be at the anchor desk tomorrow. Thanks for watching.